Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Sunday Night Live, your favorite automotive show where we take on all the issues. Because the better we get at what we all do, the better the customer experience. And contrary to popular belief, it's always been about the customer experience. That's what gets them coming back to you time and time again. So whether we're talking about the front of the house, the back of the house, the office, or even downstairs or upstairs, doesn't matter because they expect a great customer experience. So on tonight's show, we're going to talk about something very interesting. GLBA. What is it? Is it a Wordle? No, it's not. It's the Gramm Leach Bliley Act. That's what it is. And I am honored this evening by the presence of some experts in this area, starting with my friend Tom Kline from A Better Vantage Point, Gandy, CBIZ, and Atul Patel with Orbee. So welcome, gentlemen. Before we get started, why don't you each tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and how we got to this point.
Go ahead, Atul. You start.
All right. My name is Atul Patel. I have been in marketing and advertising technology companies for most of my career. And so I've been around many of these sort of regulations that have kind of come through our industry, and whether it's CAN spam or TCPA. So this is only just another chapter in my journey. And I run a company called Orbee, which is a marketing tech platform that specifically is focused on helping dealers give that better customer experience. So it's only sort of timely and relevant that these regulations sort of get seriously understood by dealers. And so I'm excited about that.
Tom, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Kline. I have a company called Better Vantage Point. I'm a former auto dealer. I was a dealership owner for 30 years. My family's been in the car business since 1925, so almost 100 years. And I am a risk mitigation consultant, which means I help dealerships make sure that they keep the money that they make through risk transference, compliance, and dispute resolution. So it's great to be here with you again, Paul.
Yep, and I'm Gandy, happy to be a part of this distinguished panel. I've been in IT leadership for 30 years. I spent 30 years in aerospace and defense and grew up with helping to protect and identify safeguards to protect, the nation's important data. For the last 5 years, I've been working for CBIZ MHM, one of the top 10 accounting, advisory, and tax firms across the nation, helping our medium-sized business clients and others to help protect and secure their data in much more cost-effective means. We're going to talk about how the FTC has come out with these regulations and safeguard rules upgrades, but a number of other compliance and regulatory agencies are doing that across other verticals and constituencies. My company and my practice helps those organizations understand them, assess where they are in their journey, and put a path forward to do it in a prioritized and efficient and cost-effective manner.
Welcome, gentlemen.
And let's not forget, Paul, that October is Cybersecurity Month, right, Ray?
Hey, taking the words right out of my mouth, Tom.
I mean, that's more important than Halloween?
Never.
Nothing's more important than Halloween.
I want to get to a couple of comments. We have Ed Chipolowski. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. And Brooke Furness says hello. Russell B. Hill. Good evening, gentlemen, and cannot wait to hear what everyone has to say tonight. Pen and paper in hand for notes. Let's get this unpacked. Jacqueline Bennett. Good evening. And Rachel Swanson. This looks like a phenomenal lineup. Thank you very much. And Beth Lucchese, my new best friend. Had a great conversation recently. Says, good evening, everyone. And Peter Fong says, cheers. And Ty Thompson with Cars on the Move coming to us via YouTube and LinkedIn. Wow, how'd you do that, Ty? You're coming through in two places. Wow. So this is nothing new, okay? This came about, I think it was 1999. So in the post, I said, let's safeguard consumer data like it's 1999, like a song, right? Well, I think we've all heard that song. But it's nothing new, and it's something that we don't tend to think about, but I'm going to kind of roll out something that I've seen for many decades being in the dealership world. Many times you walk by an office and the office is open. There's a stack of deal folders on the desk, and contained in there is all of the information that a cyber criminal or an identity theft criminal would love to have their hands on. You've got your name, the phone number, the date of birth, the social security number, income, address, you name it, everything needed to steal one's identity. Right there. You keep walking through the same store. Oftentimes it is the receptionist that's charged with filing paperwork. So what do you see on the front desk? You see a stack of papers with the same information. Now, the fines have always been huge, but yet I've never seen the piles get smaller. Now, granted, a lot of really good dealerships have taken steps. They've secured their offices with locks, whether it be biometric, where you put your finger on the lock, or codes, things like that, and people have locked down their information. But the reality is, we're not perfect yet as a business. And there's so much to it. Training seems to be a foreign word in our business, because when things get rocky, what's the first thing we cut? Training. Right? But unless you're trained in this kind of stuff, it happens over and over. And most of the time, a data breach is something that could be avoided. And the government, they're not shy and they're not afraid to go after you. And come December 9th, it's going to get even worse. I'm going to tell you about a previous company who shall remain nameless that had some issues with this. It's a big company. And here are some of the things that the government alleged: failing to develop, implement, and maintain a written information security policy, failing to implement a reasonable guidance or training for employees or third-party contractors regarding data security and safeguarding customer information, failing to assess the risks to the personal information stored in their network, such as conducting periodic risk assessments and performing vulnerability penetration testing of the network. And there's many, many more. But come December 9th, that's all going to change because they're taking it more seriously. So again, welcome to my guests. Why don't we kick it off with, what is GLBA? What does it mean to us?
Well, I'll start off real quick, Paul. Just very simply, to me, it's about safeguarding and protecting and understanding the privacy associated with the data that we're responsible over. I'll just start it off like that, and I know maybe Atul, you can give a little bit more color to that as well.
Yeah, my perspective is really skewed towards the marketer, right? Where I feel like so much data is created, right? Where the consumer is on your website, in your store, giving you PII. That's where it originates from. And yet the marketing side, Paul, like you mentioned, the training and the education around the security of that data is very minimal, right? I mean, we're talking about, how do I conquest people? How do I get these people back to my website, back to my store? We're focused so much on the customer acquisition that we forget that this is where PII starts. And so for me, the importance here is to understand that wherever the consumer is engaging with your brand, that you have protections.
For those unsure, PII is personal identifiable information.
Absolutely. And Tom could probably get deeper into this. PII is such a loose word because it's anything that is personally identifiable. So Tom, if I have this right, if you could be reversed engineered into a name, a phone number, address, even if your IP is potentially reversible, that theoretically will encapsulate PII over time.
Yeah, the Federal Trade Commission changed the definition of PII in this particular update, which now includes a home address, which seems unreasonable considering we used to have a phone book with everybody's home address, right? But now the FTC has said home addresses are PII. Cell phone numbers and email addresses are all PII. So pretty much any information about the customer is now considered PII, and dealerships are required to protect it.
I think, Paul, it's also important to note that, a couple of points. One is your discussion about the folders of papers and things like that, I think is very appropriate because, nowadays that information is digitized, and we tend to tell ourselves, well, that data is in a third-party service provider. And in reality, until you really ask yourselves, where is that data? Do I download reports? If I download information from their third-party systems, it's resident on my local machine. Does that get backed up into some servers? To be able to go back to your paper analogy and say, well, here's the originating piece of paper with the 3 copies, and I know physically it's here, here, and here. Now to understand where are all the digital copies of this PII, it becomes an interesting, conundrum to try to figure that out.
So Atul, why don't you jump in there, because that he's teed you up beautifully.
Yeah, so let's talk about copies of data. Okay, that's a great conversation. And Ray, like one of the interesting things around copies, this is very parallel to media. You know how when back in the day when we used to all download movies, that was a perfect time for a cop call, when we used to download music and movies, right? And you could play it, but increasingly the devices that you played the content in would start to block it because there were fingerprints in the content. That's a very interesting parallel here at some point, but copies of data is probably the biggest vulnerability, right? Where when data is created, it's usually created on servers, potentially not the dealer's own, right? Maybe it's a tool on their website where the consumer types in information. So now that copy, even before Ray, it's even downloaded. Where it started was already on another server away from the dealer. And then it comes into the dealer systems, and then it's used within the whole workflow. And one of those workflows where it involves third parties is you push this data out to third parties. You say, hey, marketing firm, take these people and go get them back. And you're literally sending PII. You're sending first name, last name, email, phone, even just email and phone. And you're giving them that information straight up in email usually. And that is the biggest vulnerability. And when you think about what they then do with it, they're giving it to potentially another service provider that they leverage as well. So, one of the important kind of mentions I wanted to put out here is Sephora. Now this is not exactly a direct correlation, but I think it's important, right? We all know Sephora, we may know Sephora here, but is a cosmetic company. So we all shop there. But basically, they had a lawsuit in California, right? And I think, Ray, you had mentioned this is not just federal. This is going to be state and more broadly. But Sephora paid $1.2 million in a California data privacy suit, where what was happening on their website, and this wasn't necessarily PII. So think about it. It's 1.2 million, and there wasn't even PII directly involved. It was cookies. You know how you sort of get a cookie put on someone's computer. So Sephora decided to monetize their first-party data through third parties without informing the consumer. So there's just so many dimensions of this, but it all comes down to, where is that data now? Where did it start? Whose servers is it on? And where is it going to go through the entire life cycle? And again, I think marketers are probably, I agree, Paul, the paper at the desk, that's going to I think that is within the walls, the physical building. So what's going to be easy is to look at what you're doing wrong and say, hide those papers, or let's lock up the door where the finance department is. But what about all that invisible stuff that, Ray, you're mentioning, an email on computers? That's really going to be the biggest area that could lead to a breach, which, Tom, you and I spoke about this.
Right.
The government isn't going to come in, knock on the door, and just start looking. It's something else that happens that leads them in and then says, oh, by the way,
let me see your stuff.
Let me see your stuff.
Yep.
So,
and I think that's a good transition to make sure that everybody who's watching knows that data has to be encrypted both at rest and in transit, which means that you can no longer send STIPs through email, and you can't unless your email is encrypted, right? And so I think maybe spending a few minutes on how to encrypt the data both at rest and in transit, because I think that's kind of where, from all the different pieces and parts of this regulation, if they don't get that right, they're not going to get any of it right.
I want to jump in here. The paper example is just to make it relatable, because everything's gone digital, right?
Yeah.
The paper thing was, yes, if somebody walks in and takes it, but now the cyber criminals, they're not walking through your doors. They're sniffing your internet. That's what they're doing, right? They're phishing through your employees to gain access to your data. I want to get to a couple of comments here because I don't like to get too far behind. Let's see here.
While you're reading, let me just make a quick comment, Paul. Brooke made a comment that someone else will spark the fire to have the government investigate. 80 to 90% of the time, that's going to be customer or employee complaints, mostly customer complaints. So if you're not taking care of your customers and they're going to the FTC and complaining, then the government's going to come in. And that's what happened, as an example, in Mapleton Automotive. Within the last, I think that was April of this year, they got fined $10 million because they had thousands of complaints to the FTC. So that will be the spark that starts this, will be customer complaints.
All right, we've got Terry Torline. Good evening, distinguished panel. Ty saying hello to Peter Fong, and Brian Pash is in the house. Let's go, Atul. I guess Brian's a big fan of yours, Atul.
Thanks, Brian.
Brooke Furness says, no, we're not. And Michael Moore, hello, Paul and guests, and Robert Allen Carvel. Good evening, all. Personal data security, big law in Georgia and everywhere else. Brooke Furness says, right. And it domino effect has spidered that never ends. That is so true. Rachel Swanson, people opt in and don't read the fine print. Try reading the iPhone updates. Quite frankly, if I'm retargeted with something I'm interested in, I'm okay with that. You know what? I'm one of those weird people that actually reads all that stuff and decides not to partake in most of the opportunities. Jared Kalfas, in addition to PII, etc., one of the most overlooked areas is PCI compliance. Payment card industry, credit cards. Retailers can lose their merchant accounts if they are not PCI compliant, meaning their ability to take credit cards can be taken away, which is destructive to any dealer or retailer. 1,000%, Jared. And Brooks says someone else will spark the fire to have the government investigate. Rachel Swanson, since it's being on this show, I've received 2 texts. People wanting to buy my house, which isn't on the market, annoys me. So yeah, oh, and she says, I read all the fine print also, says Brooke. So yeah, the implications are huge, because now they can access all of your data. Something as simple as a phishing trip, where an employee clicks on a link they're not supposed to, compromise the system. I've been in the business for decades, and I don't remember even once, not one time, having training on cybersecurity. It's only because I'm one of those techno geeks that's into that kind of stuff that I learned about it. But as far as dealerships I've worked for, I've never seen it. And most of the people I've spoken to have never seen it either.
Well, it's
You know-
something you mentioned there, Paul, and that is one of the 9 elements within the FTC safeguards rule, which I'm sure we'll get into. But training, awareness, that's just one of the basic things that these regulators and other bodies are looking for organizations like dealerships to do. And I tell you, these days, it's changed. I won't name any unless you want me to, but there's subscription-based services that I find are fairly inexpensive on a per employee basis, annual costs, and they provide, any sorts of, different, whether it's cartoon-based or people-based or newsletter-based. It's just good constant reminders. And I know, one of the things I like to do is also try to sprinkle in personal data safety and look at it from an identity theft point of view, because pretty much the safeguards you need to do to protect your own identity are the things you needed to protect your customer and consumer's identity in your dealership.
Mhm.
And we've been doing this for, we're no different than the banks, and the banks have been complying with these rules for many, many years.
Absolutely. And you know what? The GLBA, Gramm Leach Bliley was sort of put into place during the Clinton era, if I have that right, Tom. But what's interesting is it's like a sister to HIPAA compliance.
Right.
They all happen near the same time. I think it was in the span of 6 months, maybe 24 months or something like that. So everything we as consumers, as individuals are used to when we go to the doctor's office, when we try to access our blood test results, the 2-factor, all those elements that has sort of fundamentally changed how we interact with our medical system is the same with this. It just so happens now from banking and moved over to auto dealers. And that was like the big leap.
Now you're talking about $10 million fine. I mean, that's a big number, no doubt. But if you own a dealership, what do you say to all the customers that have been doing business with you for decades that you now have to pay for security monitoring for 2 years?
Well, let's pause there for a second, Paul. So let's take a guess. The average dealership, is it fair to say that the average dealership has 250,000 names between the service records, the DMS, the CRM? Is that a fair number in your opinion? Too high, too low?
But probably.
Atul?
Yeah, that's good. If you include the CRM, there's probably more. But
so let's do some quick math, okay, Paul, since you brought that up. In case of a breach, in case you have to buy protection for credit protection for all your customers, it's about $9 a month. So let's do the math. So that's about $100 a year times 250,000 people, which is $25 million.
And I think you're on the low side, Tom.
Oh, I think I'm on the low side too, Ray. I agree with you. Yeah. But when people are considering buying cyber insurance, of which I can't imagine running any business without it, and Ray, you may have a comment on that. Consider those upper limits, because that's not even include somebody who actually has a problem. Somebody steals their identity and goes and buys a house with it, right? Are you responsible for that? But at a minimum, 250,000 times $100 is $25 million. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I think, Tom, you bring up cyber insurance. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I will say it's an integral part of the entire protection, respond and response mechanisms that need to go in place. It's more on that latter end of things. But if you don't have that in place, I see clients that are just running around like, the proverbial chickens with their heads cut off. I mean, cyber insurance companies, they help, bring in the right forensics teams that have done this and are doing this. They bring in the right legal experts. I mean, to be put in a position of about paying ransom within 48 hours and understanding that laws are changing to where now, paying a ransom can get you in trouble. It can be a liability for you, not only as a company, but personally. So cyber insurance is one part of that entire stool that needs to be balanced appropriately.
And just to hop in here real quick, Paul, there's really two sides of risk mitigation when it comes to a dealership or any business for that matter. One is prevention, And then the second part is amelioration once you have a problem, right? And cyber insurance comes into the amelioration part. Steve Graves said, no one said there would be math, Tom. Sorry about that, Stephen.
There's always math. You go through school and you're scratching your head. Why am I learning this? I'm never going to use it. And here we are on a Sunday night in October of 2022. We're talking about math. I want to get to the comments here before we go too far. Here. Let's see. Brooke says, especially on says not regulated. Gary says, great topic. Thank you for taking the time to discuss. And Jerry Davis, good evening, everyone. Another great subject brought to us by the great Paul Meijer. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Gary Silman says, the future is using all the tools to comply with the regulations while you build your own digital brand. Build your new why buy here with safeguarding your consumer data. And Stephen Graves comes to us via YouTube. Oh, yeah. No one said there would be math, Tom.
You know, this pitch as a differentiator, how could that's a very interesting point, Gary. I like that. And it's almost as if it should happen at the point of where the data is originated. You know, these days, when you go to many sort of mobile apps or even the iPhone, right? You know, if you're going to use Apple Pay, it'll make very clear that, hey, this information is being shared to the credit card processor. And there's that warm and fuzzy you get. Maybe it isn't exactly going to be what converts, but it keeps the abandonments potentially lower. It gives that warm sort of feeling that as I'm giving my personal information, it's being kept safe. This is not simply a car dealer trying to sell me something. And so I do believe that there's some great messaging. And by the way, this is not new. The idea of the trustee, if you guys remember, right, there used to be that trust symbol. In fact, I think it still is. When you go to e-commerce sites, they have all those emblems, you know, like, right. Of course, there's your Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, but then you have all these different, you know, validation certifications, if you will. And I think this could be a very interesting one to put there, assuming you actually truly get ready for that compliance behind the scenes and you could legitimately say it. But once you can, I think that would be a very good way to engage a consumer.
You know, Atul, I'm going to take it one step further because I do understand this conversation is built around consumers and customer information, but I'm going to take it at the employee level. I think nowadays folks are looking to work at organizations that will protect their data as well. And so it's to me, it extends beyond what the FTC is calling about. And it goes back to the original thing that Paul started out with. And he started talking about, he used PII, but I'm just going to say it's any critical and sensitive information that, the way I define it, that if it got lost, stolen, held for ransom, or it appeared on the dark web for sale, that would impact your brand, impact your dealership, impact you personally. Well, then you need to protect it with these sorts of things that the FTC is talking about to protect it. We're going to focus in on consumer and customer PII and that type of data, but I'm going to say it extends into other areas as well.
Now, I'm not a purveyor of identity theft products, but I do highly recommend them and I use them. Okay, and I'll give you a perfect example because that phrase, you don't know what you don't know. Well, if you don't monitor it, you definitely don't know. So I have this service that gave me an alert that an email address of mine was found on the dark web. It tells you where the breach occurred. And guess what? It was a dental office that I had gone to that apparently, alleged, of course, makes money selling that email address to other places. And somehow that got into the wrong hands. Most of the time when there's a breach, you know, at a dealer, we complain about the cost of the DMS. Yes, it's expensive. And we complain about having access to it. Oh, they're holding my companies for ransom. Well, no, they're not, because a lot of times what happens is they try to circumvent the system. They come up with these these passwords and user accounts that get shut down rather quickly by the DMS company, and then they just come up with a new one. But the bottom line is we need to take this serious because it's happening. It's been happening. And the ultimate responsibility falls on the dealer. Now, Tom talked about $25 million expense. Atul talked about a $10 million fine. That in two instances, that's $35 million right there. Plus the shame of it all. Who is going to go back to a dealership that didn't care enough about them to safeguard their information when all of that technology is available and has been for quite some time?
It's just good business, Paul. I mean, besides the fact that you are required to protect the customer's information, it's just good business because you don't want to call that third generation customer and tell them that their information's now out on the dark web. That's just not a good conversation that you want to have.
Yeah, and I'd say sort of, when we think about everything you have to do in the safeguard rule, dealers should not try to achieve everything all at once. We know that's not practical, but there are stepping stones and there's ways to get there. And any regulator, and maybe Ray, Tom, you guys could give a thought on this, is if they come in and see that you're doing real legitimate work towards these protections, that you could basically get a ticket or say, all right, well, let's continue doing what you're doing. Show me where you're at in 6 months to a year. How does a dealer now all of a sudden look at this giant rule and take baby steps? I certainly am all about sort of the marketing area being the most vulnerable, and that's where I want dealers to target the most. But what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll kind of go first and take it over to you, Tom. I mean, I think I mentioned it before, but there's 9 elements within this safeguards rule. And as I look at the 9, I think, well, where do you start? And my clients ask me, where do you start? Number one is, well, it's actually is the first one, security supervision. Who is the person representing your dealership that understands all this? Now, if that's somebody inside, fantastic. If it's got to be somebody outside, you got to consider that. And there's multiple ways that we can get into those details some other time. But I mean, you do need to have a named person. The second next thing.
1 second, Ray. That's the qualified individual or CISO.
Yeah.
And since you are a CISO, Ray, why don't you tell everyone about that?
Yeah, they used to actually use the word CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, in this safeguards rule. I think this version has now moved it into qualified individual. And,
right.
It's some of this stuff is a little subjective and it hasn't been specifically identified. But I mean, let's be honest, some of this is a little, at least to me, it's intuitive. If you don't understand these 9 things, then you're not qualified, right? You need to read these 9 things that you need to do. If you are asking, well, what do you mean by a risk assessment? Then you're not there yet. And you may need to have some training for that internal person to get up to speed. But in the meantime, bridge the gap with what I'll call, there's fractional and virtual Chief Information Security Officer services out there. There's individuals that, could on a part-time basis represent. You don't need to hire a full-time equivalent. That's just, you don't have to do that. But you do need to have somebody who understands what this stuff means for you. And it needs to be economical and practical and all that good stuff. And I know you can find that. The second biggest part of this is the risk assessment. And, they came out a few years ago. Well, back in the 80s and 90s when I was in aerospace and defense, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, came out with a security set of standards and controls that the government, anybody doing business with the government aerospace needed to follow. Well, I mean, that's huge and crazy. And over the last few years, you've seen small and mid-sized businesses get attacked. And they've taken that framework and they've modified it to be more understandable and more easy to follow and to implement. And so there's a number of those security controls frameworks out there. And it's important that the number 2 thing on this list is to have a risk assessment against a security controls framework. We're all used to being audited against financial control frameworks. So this isn't a crazy idea. It's just the next evolution in cybersecurity, similar to financial information, having financial controls. This is cyber controls over your critical and sensitive information. And then I think the two others worth mentioning is we've already mentioned staff and training, but then vendor security reviews, because I think I saw in some of the comments there is, a lot of our data is held with third parties. And, I don't want to take up much more of my time, but, doing vendor security reviews and not just passing over the responsibility of that data to a third party without A, asking questions, B, obtaining compliance reports, doing things on an annual basis. Vendor management from a security point of view is paramount to one of these 9 areas.
It's something that's not been done before that I'm aware of at any store that I've walked into, but now it has to be done. I want to get to a couple of comments. Rachel Swanson, and then you add another layer of dealers working with vendors who are compliant with legal backing. Yep, we just covered that. Joe Chambers, hey everyone. Every Sunday morning, we get together on something called SDL, or Service Drive Live. Message Joe for the link. It is a group of fixed ops professionals that talk about best practices, what happens. So every Sunday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern, message Joe for the link. Thanks for tuning in, Joe. Gary says, one portal to gateway all the consumers' information on the dealership secure portal. And he says the law passed in 2003. I mean, think about it. 2003, right? That's almost, we're coming up on 20 years, but it seems as though, and I'm part of the car business, so collectively we are all to blame here. We don't seem to move very quickly on this type of stuff. We tend more to be pushed into situations than we are the first ones to step on and say, hey, this is great stuff. Let's do this for our customers. No, it's not how it works. Brooke says companies need to come together and resolve the ADF/XML elephant in the room.
Let me add some thoughts on that. What Brooke is talking about, and most dealers know about this because that's how leads are moving around in this industry. When a lead is generated, let's say by a third party or even on your own website inside of these forms or chats, how that lead ends up in your CRM so that your BDC, your salespeople could call that information is through an ADF. They literally email the lead. Now, this is going to be something that's going to take a lot of work to overcome. You can't really encrypt an XML file like Brooke's referencing, but there's certainly ways to change how that information even originates. So my vision, Paul, I've been thinking about this for a while, where anytime a consumer gives information to a dealer, the dealer should be the only one who has it. So if there's a vendor that has some new cool whiz-bang tool on websites to improve the experience, do that part, but you don't need the PII to make that work well. So let the dealer control the PII, let the dealer get a copy, and now there is no movement of this PII anymore. So we've been sort of working on ideas like that because I think that's going to fundamentally shift not only the ability to follow what Ray kind of mentioned in terms of compliance and knowing who has data, but it's just going to shift control. We can't forget one thing that's very interesting about this whole GLBA. The FTC is almost handing to the dealer the permission to take back control over their data from their vendors. Indirectly, this thing could actually help dealers say, hey, vendors, you don't need a copy of this PII. Do you want to go get a $20 million policy? Then have a copy. But if you don't, give me the information, delete it off your servers, keep all the other important sort of non-PII stuff that makes your system amazing. But now the consumer can be given that seal of approval that says your information is coming to the dealer and we will protect it for you and no one else has it. So yeah, it's interesting. Brooke did say it was an elephant in the room, and I just kind of pulled the red blanket off of it. So absolutely, Brooke, you're right on that.
Atul, that was a mic drop moment, man. Want to get to a couple more comments. Let's see. Gary Silman says, what have they been doing for the last 20 years? Christopher Roach, do car manufacturers like GM apply any penalties to dealerships for security non-compliance?
Yes.
Do they really? I know as a part, if I could just throw this out real quick.
Yeah.
So in terms of encrypting data, your OEMs are required to encrypt data back and forth. So when you punch a car that is now sold, that's supposed to be encrypted when it's being sent to the OEM. So OEMs are not exempt from this. And the FTC says that if your vendor isn't complying, you're supposed to get another vendor. But what I would recommend on that is to keep a log of when you called, maybe twice a month. Hey, are you encrypting the data yet? Hey, are you encrypting the data yet? So if the FTC walks in, then you can say, now listen, I'm not General Motors, and I'm trying to get them to encrypt their data, but I can't make General Motors do anything, and I can't get another vendor. And then real quickly, going back to something Atul talked about a few minutes ago, if a regulator comes in your business, you're going to write a check. The question is it a 4-figure check or a 6-figure check or a 7-figure check? If you can show them that you are trying to comply with this law, and that includes some of the other real quick things we need to talk about. MFA, multi-factor authentication, has to happen. That includes
more and more, by the way. The companies are proactively pushing that. So I applaud them for the effort on that.
Right. It also includes training and Ray touched on this, but it includes training every employee every year. So there has to be a constant, and there are so many topics we've talked about: phishing and cybersecurity and passwords, and don't leave your passwords out on your desk blotter, which people still do. I still go into dealerships and people have sticky pads, and it's at the bottom of their screen. Right? That's not okay anymore. It wasn't okay back in 2003. But these are all things, and if you can show that you are trying to comply with this, then I think you're going to be writing a 4-figure check instead of a 6 or 7-figure check. And there are some softwares that will help with this. They'll help track what you're doing and help you with the vendor management and help keep track of all those things. But I think it's important to know that the OEMs are required to do this too.
I want to get to a couple of comments. Rachel Swanson, cybersecurity is a must in-house or outsourced. Can't stress that enough, because when the chips fall, they fall in your lap. So you're responsible. And even though you've taken the steps to say, hey, this is what I'm trying to get done, they don't care so much about what you're trying to get done so much as to what you are getting done. And you still bear the ultimate responsibility. Jerry Davis says it's the best group of fixed ops SDL and the place to be. To my earlier SDL comment. And this is where to be on Sunday night. Thank you, Jerry. Brooke Furness says CRM need API, evolve, working together. And Rachel Swanson says dealers should have a tool or method to capture their own first-party data.
Atul, you want to jump in there on that one?
Yeah, I think this, what Rachel's probably alluding to is just what we were talking about earlier. Dealers have become dependent on so many other tools and vendors and systems, which is where this vulnerability is the most. And so having your own mechanisms to capture this information. And what is first party? First party data is actually this data we're talking about protecting. It's data the consumer gives you and that it's yours. First party meaning the dealers. But remember, but remember this: if it is created by another vendor, then it's not yours. It's now in their hands, and they're also holding a copy of it. But the consumer doesn't know that. So when there is a breach by a vendor, and you have to be the one that delivers the message to the consumer saying, hey, I'm sorry, there was a breach in your information. And this has happened, right? We as consumers, whether it's Home Depot or Samsung recently had a breach, and usually it's not these companies themselves, it's who Home Depot was using that got breached. Ray, talk a little bit about that, right? Because so many times the breaches we hear about outside of auto, in most use cases, it's not the company who has to report it, pay for the free credit monitoring, pay off of their insurance policy. It's some other vendor that caused that mistake.
Yeah, I think I see a comment here by Mark Williamson. Why does the dealer have to have the control of the data? Why not the third party? Shift the responsibility, liability. Well, guess what? It's all intertwined and mixed and intertwined. In terms of, we use third parties, but those third parties also use third parties to do what they do. Many of the, I won't name names, but the applications you use, guess what? They're using Amazon Web Services. They're using other sorts of storage and infrastructure services. Those supply chain attacks are on the rise because the hackers know that if they get to code that's within every piece of server that's common out there, they'll get more data. So there's a lot of supply chain attacks. At the end of the day, when we talk about, let's just keep it twofold, the dealer and the third party. The third party has responsibilities to protect your data. There's no doubt. And they have liability and they have responsibilities. But it's our responsibility as dealers to at least ask the questions, to look for compliance reports, to be able to say, how are you protecting our data? And guess what? I know you would think they would mind it. I used to work for a company where we had this is going to show you the age. We had an internal payroll department, and I was in internal audit. We cut checks for employees on site. We were the payroll service provider for an aerospace and defense firm, right? And I was in internal audit, and we audited the controls of that payroll function. Well, when ADP became the third party that performed the function, we all said, man, we want to audit them. Well, so did every other client of theirs. And what came out as a result of that was, we're not going to let everybody come in and audit controls. We're going to have an independent firm audit our controls. We're going to issue what's called a SOC 2 report. And so it's very easy and common these days to ask a service provider like ADP, can I have a copy? I'm one of your clients. You do payroll for me. I would like to see a copy of your SOC 2 report. Now, number one, we got to be willing to ask the question and get the copy. Number two, we got to be smart enough to know what it says and what it means. In the SOC 2 report, they self-identify what are other third parties they're using. There's a lot of rich information. Now, I'll go on record to say, ADP, just like, Amazon, a lot of these big companies, they have some really good SOC 2 reports. But when you look at the vendors you're doing business with your critical data, your PII of your customers, your consumers, and you make that list, you need to have this vendor management program, and at the very least ask for SOC 2 reports or compliance reports, or even get somebody knowledgeable on the phone to talk to them, how they're encrypting, how they're using MFA, how they're doing access provisioning, all the normal sorts of things. If we don't ask these questions and we just assume they're protecting our data, then we're going to see a list on the dark web of our customers and our dealers' customers on the dark web for sale. There's a very famous case. I think I can say, some of this stuff, where there was a security researcher who frequents the dark web, and he saw a lot of credit card information for sale. And he noticed a common thing. They had all been to a Sonic drive-in. Well, he calls up Sonic drive-in behind the scenes, says, I think you've been breached. And they're like, no, you're barking up the wrong tree. You better not say anything, blah, blah, blah. I think at the end of the day, he had a blog, and he published, if you've been to, Sonic, you might want to look at your data and change some things. So, and then they came out after that and said they had a breach. You don't want to find out your customer's data is for sale from anybody. You want to do everything you can to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's what these safeguards rule is all about, is just trying to take it a step further. And I think Atul said it, earlier, this is a journey. And Tom mentioned it, that the journey just needs to be started. It needs to be formalized, and you need to have a plan of completion. And that's what the regulators, that's what the FTC, that's what your customers, that's what your employees want to see, is that you're taking it seriously and that you have a plan and you're executing it to the way you can. I'm on a board of directors for a not-for-profit financial credit union. And I've been on that board of directors since the mid-90s. And this was back when they weren't as digitized. Over the years, they did mobile deposits on phones. I mean, crazy stuff, right? At the time, there's been more digitization, strategic movements of digitization of products and services and information. And my role, being on the board of directors, it probably took us 5 years for the board and leadership and IT and others to kind of get in the groove of what the pattern of review and discussion and metrics was. It's a journey.
I want to jump in here, a couple of comments, and I want to address Joe's comments specifically. Brooke says, I have seen CRO/CFO leave out all kinds of sensitive info. I think we've all seen that. Now, here's Joe's comment. This is so far out of most dealers' wheelhouse, it's sad. I've sat through several vendor presentations on this and was really surprised at the vulnerabilities in the automotive sector as a whole. Now, what he's saying there just basically backs up what I said earlier. It's not anything anybody knows, but now it's not that you're asking them to do you a favor, it's the law, right? You have to, and they have to comply, because if they don't comply and give you that information, doesn't mean you're not on the hook. You're still on the hook. So either they're going to have to supply what you need to protect yourself and your customers, or they have to go. It's that simple. And a lot of times companies make decisions on money. All right, stop me if I'm lying. This guy's or this gal is only this much money and that other program costs that much. Well, maybe it's because that other company spends a whole lot more to make sure that their data is secure and that they're not exposing themselves or you or your customers. So when the shit hits the fan, I would duck.
Well, and it's also, we don't want the dealers to get what one dealer calls a case of the yets, that it hasn't happened to me yet, and so I'm not going to worry about it yet. There's a dealer in Northern Virginia last year, I think it was 2021, who got tagged for $7 million on ransomware. I mean, this happens, and just to mention, the ransom. If you have cybersecurity insurance, better check your sub limit to make sure how much you have in ransomware, because the typical policy, and Ray, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the typical policy that has $1 million, you think, oh, well, I have $1 million. Usually there's a sub limit of $250,000 for ransomware. It's just not enough, in my opinion. When you look at these dealerships that I was in Park City last week with a group of CPAs, and I asked how much a typical dealership was worth. I said, was it 20 million, 15 million, 25 million? And like a chorus of CPAs said, no, much higher than that. So let's just, one said 30 million, one said 50 million. I mean, when you're protecting $30 million of assets, to put blinders on this issue is not practicing good risk mitigation, we'll say.
I want to jump in to get to a couple of comments, but before I do, just letting everybody know there's so much content here, we're going to go over. I'm just letting you know that up front. I hope you guys are okay with that. All right, so Gary, Rachel Swanson, great point, Ray. And Gary says the inside of the dealerships needs a total remodel. Take the walls down to the studs and rebuild back with new secure cyber control. There's so many appliances today. When's the last time somebody did an audit of their internet appliances You'd be shocked to see how many stores have appliances that are beyond end of life, meaning that the security patches and updates ended some time ago. And guess what? This stuff is happening every day. There are people sitting in rooms for a living, doing nothing other than looking for ways to crack code and to come out with things. When you think you have a security program for your computer, guess what? The security program discovers new problems based on particular algorithms. It may not have seen that particular issue. And when Tom was talking about ransomware, this is a beauty, okay? Because in my opinion, and I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but in my opinion, most, if not all, ransomware can be avoided by simply training your employees. More often than not, it's that email or text message that somebody opens up that it used to be you had to click on a link. Now you don't even have to in some cases. It runs an executable the minute you open it without clicking on the link.
Paul, the most recent one I've heard is, are you interested? The email says something like, "Are you interested in seeing what everybody else makes at the dealership?"
Oh gosh. Well, it's interesting. We've gotten some of our employees have gotten these emails that are supposedly from me, and it'll say something like, "Hey, I'm with a client. Can you get me this Apple gift card? I need to get," right? And we've gotten pretty good. Well, number one, there are tools within our email system and so forth that let us block more aggressively. You're better off missing a message that's important than having another 100 that shouldn't get through into computers. But our team has gotten used to either getting a good chuckle or checking with me or other individuals within our organization, because it's so easy to graph your entire company through LinkedIn and start emailing one another, or the hackers could do all that, right? And then, Paul, to your point about Wi-Fi and things like that, you could walk into how easy is it to just walk into a dealership and just sit down at one of the tables and just say, "Yeah, I'm just waiting for my friend to come or my wife to come," or "No, I'm good. I'm probably going to just check out this car." And they could be doing all sorts of things within the network.
From the parking lot.
From the parking lot.
Yes. That happens all the time. I was in a dealership up in New York and doing my rounds before I would go see the dealer. And I pulled out my camera and there's this and that. And the general manager calls up and says, "Hey, you got to not leave this stuff out." He said, "I didn't leave anything out." The dealer said, "I'm looking at the picture."
Hey, so Atul, you mentioned social engineering and business email compromises where they act like you, and your employees are getting better at that. But now the hackers have taken it to the next technological level, and they're doing deep fakes. And man. Hopefully most of the people here will at least look up deep fakes on 60 Minutes. But they're going to take all the words that you're saying in this broadcast, and they're going to leave a voicemail of something like gift cards, give these out.
The ability to create deep fake video, deep fake audio,
that's just wrong.
Is ridiculous. I mean, I was telling some people about this too. I mean, it's going to be used for sales tools where a voicemail is left, but it's fake. It's reading a prompt, but then it sounds like the salesperson. So It's inevitable that all these things we want to do, right? Even when we think about the customer journey, it is inevitable that you're going to need different systems to make that customer journey perfect. And so you're going to have third-party systems. You're going to have data in lots of places. It's just kind of what you do with it. But yeah, the deep fake piece is really scary. I don't even have an opinion on that yet.
We're really kind of putting an exclamation point on a topic, one of the 9 areas, which is training and awareness. And there's going to be folks coming out of here saying, "Oh, I didn't know about deep fakes." And now they're kind of we're starting to talk about some things around the corner that to be wary of so that we don't fall victim to it. And if you go back in time to when the people were falling victim to those gift card scams, and guess what? Some still are. We just need to keep the word going forward as to what are the most recent ones, what's happening, what's going out there. I want to talk about Joe Chambers' comment there that says this is so far out of the dealer's wheelhouse. It's sad. I think we might have missed that one, or else I didn't hear it. But I'd say, Joe, you could strike out the word dealer there and put almost any market vertical in there. Colleges and universities, manufacturing, every single one of them. Nobody feels comfortable with it in this space, which is why we need to just take it a step at a time. You need to find that partner that will help you take it a step at a time in bite-sized chunks and just, I'm sorry to say it, but relax through this requirement. I know sometimes scare tactics and all those things are important, but at the end of the day, you should understand the importance of this, not only to meet a regulatory compliance, but because it's good business and it's good, possibly, to be able to put a little check mark there to say, hey, we care, and raise your brand awareness. But at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. So let's just find the partner to help us baby step through it, make progress. 5 years from now, 2 years from now, we're better and better and better and better.
I think also just to mention touch on a few other requirements that we haven't talked about. One is that you're required to have change management procedures. So, and what that means is that maybe it's the qualified individual, if he gets hit by a bus or he gets fired, that there's a written policy, right? A written incident response plan as part of this, how you'll communicate not only internally, but also with law enforcement, who's the person who's supposed to talk to law enforcement about this, who's going to talk to the media. All those parts need to be in there, the incident response plan. But it's important to have change management procedures, not only in this, but in other areas of the business as well. But that is a requirement.
Are you suggesting there's turnover at a dealership?
No, I would never suggest that.
Another quick thing that I mentioned, if you're an auto groups have a really unique opportunity to get a lot of ROI on this conversation, right? Because you're not just a single rooftop that could have a security vulnerability. Every procedure, every policy, the binder of procedures, the systems you put in place could be applied to all of your stores in a very sort of universal fashion. So, I think dealer groups especially should take advantage of this and then apply these sort of rules one store at a time, and as they're buying more stores, this will be part of the diligence process, right, Ray? I mean, I would imagine that if you're going to buy a store, you're buying potential liability.
This goes back to, I think it was Chris Roach who talked about OEMs and, are there penalties? Penalties, I don't know. I think it's the cost of doing business. And I think that if we want to continue working together, OEMs and dealers with third parties, we all have to understand how important this topic is and be able to say, this is what we're doing. Happy to share throughout my constituency, including what we need to share with our clients, customers, and others, what we're doing to protect the data.
There's also process creep that happens, right? Because when these bigger dealer groups buy a group, the IT infrastructure isn't the same. So bringing that infrastructure up to whatever the standards are they want to do is different. And then there's the general manager who wants to use this widget instead of the other widget, that widget. And so there's a lot of that kind of creep that happens in the bigger stores also.
Yeah. Well, Ray was talking earlier about vendors, right? So, it's obvious that Orbee is like a MarTech platform, right? So that's actually what dealers can use to do some of these things related to customer experience. So talking single-handedly, Ray, you were talking about SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. There's ISO, 9701. There's quite a few of these, and we're actually in that process. So what's interesting, it is stepping. You don't just go and get it with the snap of the finger. There's surveys, there's processes, and it's ongoing. So it is important that you can actually separate vendors who are taking it seriously and then people who are sort of like, I'll deal with it later, or it's not an issue. Now, what's the kind of the interesting sort of flipping it on its head sort of model here is with the cloud, right? When you think about Amazon Web Services, you think about these cloud systems. If dealers end up, dealer groups, I'll specifically talk about groups here because what I've seen is they have the wherewithal to have a CTO, a CIO, a security officer. But when you start to see, and I've seen this with many of the dealer groups I've talked to, where they've taken the systems and flipped it around and said, we're going to host it. We're going to put it in our cloud. And every vendor is sort of attaching to our system. Once they do that, they have greater control. And we actually, Peter Fong, my colleague, and I spoke to Amazon Web Services specifically about how can we make this easier for dealers to do, because the on-premise concept, right? The idea that one day, I would imagine in the Ray, maybe you could sort of confirm this, but in the medical industry, the HIPAA aspect, right? Or even in government, GovCloud, right? Isn't GovCloud kind of a similar structure where all of a sudden you make sure that the cloud where you're going to put everything is protected in new ways? And now you have all of those systems sort of flipped where the dealer owns it, the dealer group owns it, and all those vendors are attaching to it, and they don't get any of the PII. They just use it to provide their individual services to the dealer. Is the GovCloud and HIPAA, how does that correlate when it comes to kind of using the cloud?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something there. And I think it's, kind of like you hear of public cloud services and private cloud services. And I think these are, kind of group segmented private clouds underneath an overarching, larger cloud. So that your tunnel, it's a private cloud of information that's overarching within a particular regulatory or governmental agency or oversight. So I think you are hitting on some futuristic sorts of things there, for dealers and others that maybe being considered at other levels. But that is what you're talking about.
What I find very interesting is that we are so adverse to change, right? But yet when these changes happen, when you look at it holistically, they really benefit us, right? So here we're seeing the dealer is getting back control of their data. That's huge, because for how many years have dealers been complaining that, hey, it's my data, but I feel as though, maybe it's really their data. No, it's your data. And look at something as simple as electric vehicles, right? Retention has been horrible. 7 out of 10 customers don't come back to us to service their car. Now, as we get more into electric vehicles, what we're learning is that that's going to give us a boost in the arm for retention, because the customer is going to want to come back to the dealer because it's a specialized area. So, I always look for the silver lining in every cloud, no pun intended on the cloud. But this really is something good, because it's giving us another crack at pulling our business back, limiting our exposure. I love this stuff.
So Paul,
go ahead, Tom.
Just real quickly, when we're talking about protecting customer information, remember that you have to have a procedure in your used car department. When people trade their vehicles in, you have to wipe their data off of the car, right? Because people don't typically, they have all their contacts and maybe who knows what people keep in their cars, right?
Their contract they keep in the car. They keep the loan and lease contract in the glove box. Mind-boggling.
Absolutely, but also you should install a procedure to make sure that you delete the PII or the profiles is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, like when you rent a car, right? And you're like, let me go connect my Bluetooth, and there's like everyone else.
Unbelievable.
I used to do that when I worked in a store. I used to do that, just call it the OCD in me, but I just felt it was the right thing to do. Somebody buys that car, they hit home, they go to the person's home, they hit the garage door opener, they walk in. It is just simple stuff. I want to get to a couple of comments. Rachel Swanson says, great show, Paul. Suggest do a part 2. We might be able to do something like that. Brooke Furness says, hey, Rachel, Tom and I are chatting more on this next week on my show. Feel free to join. And Rachel says, Brooke Furness, love to join. Brooke says, love it, Tom. And she says, we'll connect with you. Rachel Swanson, they're so good. Then you check the sender and now text too. Now, how many people are on Facebook? Anybody in the audience on Facebook? Anybody check their Facebook while they're at work? How many times do you get that message, that annoying messenger thing that says that, hey, is this you? And people click on it and they compromise their PC because it's just yet another virus that gets sent out there. Crazy stuff. Brooke says, I have group that had one of their stores held up by ransomware. Why? Lack of Wi-Fi password. 3 weeks later, their sister store was hit for the same reason. I worked at a sob store back in the day. The guy, he was handing me the key to the building, and he was showing me how the security system works. I love this guy dearly. Guess what the code was for the store's security system?
His birthday.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Harder than that. No, even harder than that, Ray.
The address.
1, 1, 1, 1.
He's using my password.
That was the alarm code. Crazy. Brooke says we don't even know if it's even known if it was really you talking. Could be a synthetic media. Jerry Davis says great information here. Thank you all for being here. I greatly appreciate you, Paul Meijer. Your show has always something that gets me thinking. Great job. And Joe Chambers says great advice, Ray. Appreciate that. And absolutely, Tom, change management procedure is something we have a hard enough time with in regular issues. We need that binder for everything that we do. It now has to be documented or it didn't happen. And
Right.
Rachel Swanson says, it's not just dealerships facing this threat. I received a letter last month from a medical imaging company that they had a data breach. I would think dealers could easily partner with a company to oversee this. Sleep better at night. And Gary Silman says, nice job with the topic. Plenty more to see. Contrary to the, oh, nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Brooke Furness says, check out privacy4cars.com.
That's on the issue. I have not spoken to them, but what Brooke's talking about is they have a system or a methodology to wipe the data from the used cars, and that's their product.
And then, a lot of us travel also. When you need to charge up, you see all those people huddled around the charging stations, kind of like the homeless people around a fire dumpster. And they plug in their USB charger into the charger at the airport. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little pro tip here. Hackers will plant malware in those chargers. When you plug in your charger and it asks, is this a trusted device? You automatically say yes, and guess what? You just let the spider into your web. Let's see what else we have here. Brooke says your car is your phone, 100%. And Rachel Swanson, the way I understand, the laws will much more stricter at the store than online process. And Brooke says Andrea is awesome, owner of Privacy 4 Cars. Yeah, so I mean, you have to really, really, really be careful here because the bad guys, they're at this 24/7.
I do like, Paul, what you said earlier about the sort of the silver lining and the opportunity about controlling your data. dealers should definitely keep that in the back of their mind as that sort of light at the end of this tunnel, right? That consumer, and it goes even to the point made earlier about the seal that your data is safe with us, with our, but if you build that into your mindset, the laws are just kind of a backdrop to it, right? You're almost using the law to help drive that change, but owning that data. Imagine your dealership is the only person who gets to know that this person serviced an oil change. Just imagine if you're the only one that has that relationship with that consumer and you don't let any of that data leak for whatever reason, right? That is so powerful from a retention standpoint, from a relationship standpoint. It's amazing. I mean, that's the side effect of this whole thing.
And Atul, just to chime in there, it amazes me when I see dealers report all that stuff to Carfax. I don't get it. There are so many. I mean, apparently you get a discount if you report all your service tickets. But what an incredible, in my opinion, bad business decision. And it opens you up for liability too, because if it shows that you changed the tires and put new hubs or whatever you did, and then 3 years later they get into an accident and the cause was the tires, you're just going to get dragged into the litigation. I mean, I don't get that. And any dealers who are watching, feel free to call me so we can discuss that. But and there's also PII there, right? Because that's an issue too, is you're reporting, and so that has to be encrypted too.
You know what? Speaking of that, and Paul, I know you were going to say something, but let me just finish this thought. VIN is now in the list of PII, is it not?
Yes.
The VIN number is, and of course, VIN's on your lot to sell, has maybe some history to it, and maybe that's a different story, but probably still the same. But the fact that you could take a VIN and figure out its registration data, and then figure out where they live, and then figure out their PII, the rest of their PII, and then their phone number. This is why the VIN number itself is private information, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Well, that kind of turns everything on its head, because here's how I look at it. If I'm looking to buy a pre-owned car, I want to see the VIN number. I want to check to see if that car is legit, because oftentimes titles get washed between states. Right? Somebody buys a car, they sell it, or report the title lost. They sell it out of state. Now you could end up buying somebody's car and find out that when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to register that car, guess what? You can't register it because there appears to be a lien on the vehicle that did not appear on the title of the car that you purchased and paid for.
Or it was salvaged or flooded or whatever the case may be, because there are a lot of states that have less protections, and they're able to wash the title, which is you take a salvage title and you go through the state, the DMV, you follow their procedures, and you get a clean title afterwards. Happens a lot.
So what happens now? Dealers spend, maybe not right at this point, because we're in a seller's market, but we've already seen that the winds of change have started to blow, right? And it's not going to be long before we go back to before COVID, when the chief complaints I used to hear was inventory costs are choking us and there's not enough people coming through the door. And they go back to spending stupid amounts of money through these third-party lead providers. These same people that send your information to several dealerships, or maybe they send it to you initially, but there's a window of opportunity that you have. And once that window expires, they then, it's been brought up, legal cases, they sell it to your competitors. What happens to all these guys and gals?
That, by the way, that happens both in lead generation, but also the cookies and the listening on your website. And you know, again, that's where the Sephora thing came about. So there is absolutely so much data leakage here. But you know, I think the hope is out of this conversation, what Ray pointed out is important, which is stepping stones, right? And I think that there are topics here that we're bringing up that dealers sort of tend to dismiss, which is, around vendors, around lead gen, around PII, around forms, chat programs, all those things. If the dealer starts to just ask that question and have that conversation with their own sort of chief marketing officers, their IT people, just that conversation alone will create opportunities, simple opportunities to knock out one at a time.
Tom, what do you suggest are some best practices right now that dealers should start to implement?
First thing I would do is start on MFA. It's super simple. There's a product called
multi-factor
authentication. So one easy to install product that's not expensive, and Ray, you can chime in here, is Cisco has a product called Duo, D-U-O. It's easy. I think it's like $350 per employee per month or something, Ray. Is that right? Something around there?
Yeah, I think, yep.
Something right around in there. Easy, simple. I would get started there. Second, take control of your data. Call Atul, have conversation with him. If you can take control of your data, you're going to be a long way into the process, because then you can control your vendors, which you're required to do, have them sign off on it. The third thing I would do probably is look at some of these software companies that provide kind of a central tank, and they also provide training. That's probably 30% of it. If you can get the training handled and get the vendors handled and document what you're supposed to be doing, and then call somebody like Ray and do the risk assessments and have that done, and make sure you're doing the vulnerability testing, the penetration testing, because you either have to have vulnerability testing and penetration testing or continuous monitoring. Continuous monitoring is expensive. That's a choice that you can, that you'll have to, from a business and risk perspective, decide if it's something you want to do. Is do that, and then you're going to have to make sure that all the computers have patch management, right? To make sure that they always continually get updated on all the newest security features. So that's kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 where I would start, Paul.
And Ray, what are some of the tips that you would put out there?
Yeah, I agree with obviously where Tom was coming from. I think one of the pitfalls that I've seen dealers make, and by no means am I saying you should not do this, and I think Atul was just talking about it, have conversations with your IT folks and marketing folks. I know that I'm an IT person, so I'm gonna go on record to say that, and I'll say that IT folks are it's those hallway conversations, or you have a meeting to talk about, hey, let's talk about this FTC thing, and all of a sudden you get an IT person saying, well, we've got a firewall, we have MFA, we patch our stuff. At the end of the day, and there's also self-assessments that people go through. I don't know if any of you have filled out a cyber insurance questionnaire, but when you go through that, you can really get lost in just those yes/no questions. Do you have MFA? I've seen it where a company says, yes, we have MFA, because their IT person said, yeah, we've got it. But they didn't have it on all their systems, and they didn't have it on the system that got breached. So the insurance company didn't pay. So the devil's in the details.
Hold on a second. You bring up a very important point there. Okay. The insurance company didn't pay because they did not take the steps required. It's like leaving your key in the ignition of your car and the door unlocked. If somebody walks off with that car,
running.
Did I hear? Is there
running?
Willful negligence?
It's like drunk driving. You're not getting covered.
Yeah,
on your accident.
So great points. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to add in, but do go on.
No, so I think, if I had to say one thing, it's got to be, and I really don't want to make it self-serving. It's not about me or our services or anything like that, but an independent, low-cost independent risk assessment, just to kick the tires, see where you are. Is what your IT folks and your marketing folks and others saying, does it line up with the letter of the law? Does it go to the depths that you need it to be to protect your business, to protect your customers, and the data that's so important at what this regulation is talking about?
Now, to piggyback off of what Ray just said, okay, I think that a crucially important step is the training for all of the people in the store, because more often than not, it's a person. Okay, we all get the emails.
Mhm.
Someone logged into your Facebook. You're immediately going to be panicked. You click on that email, okay? Or they may have gotten some information about you on the web just by looking at your Facebook or some of your other social media, send you an email saying that they have some dirt on a particular item that they really don't have dirt on. But guess what? That cutesy little test that you did where you put in all of those password hints that they harvested, they send you something like that. And now you panic and you click on it. Okay, so by training all of the people in your business, and I say business, not just dealerships, because it's every business. If you deal with the public, if you have email, and I think we would all agree that there's not a person other than a dead person, and even they have emails. They just don't use them anymore. But everybody has email. And that's where a lot of the breaches happen. But so training, I think, would be key. Now, do you guys you set this up for companies and you do like mock attacks and things like that to see whether or not you can get in or get past the people?
Yeah, we have those capabilities and services. We provide incident response, tabletop exercises, just to sit around and talk about different scenarios like ransomware and who's going to do what. I've done one recently with a client where out of that, the response was actually pretty good, but out of it came the request by the organization that we should document this in a playbook so that if a key person is gone, you could just go down the list and say, these are the things to do. So it's just an important aspect to it. And I think I see a comment from Jacqueline Bennett on insurance companies use the application to determine coverage, and answering the questions correctly is very important. And that kind of goes back into sometimes those forms just say yes or no, but I believe there's always spaces to be able to add more information, to be able to say, we use MFA on here and here, but we don't use it over here and here. So I think that the devil's in the details in answering those questions, establishing the relationship with the insurance broker and provider, and being able to go into further detail.
And remember, it only takes one slip up. It only takes one breach. Atul, some best practices you want to put forth?
I would want dealers to think about their marketing efforts and where data is being sent out. Let's where data originates and where data gets sent out, and doing it sort of audit around that. Understand, just being aware and saying,
Whoops.
Uh-oh.
I think he just got hacked.
This was not planned.
While we're waiting for Atul to come back, let me just get to a couple of comments. Let's see here. Brooke Furnace says, Tom, I interviewed probably 5 months ago. Rachel Swanson, yes, VIN definitely PII along with phone maids. And Mike Fisher, hey, Mike, agreed. There is technology today that dealers can track all communication, docs exchanged, etc., between their employees and customers equals FTC compliance. Rachel Swanson says, great summary, Atul, with a punching emoji. Let's do that on the replay. Brooke Furnace, key point, those companies are only 30%, not 100%.
She's talking specifically about some of the software tools that are out in the market. And some of them might have you believe that if you just follow the software that you're good, and that's not the case.
So that is definitely worth sharing. 30%, that means that 70% of the time you're SOL.
No, it's just 70% of the work to be done, like all the stuff Ray was talking about. That's got nothing to do with the software. That's all the rest of the stuff that you as the dealer or the business owner have to do to be compliant with the GLBA.
Yeah, so you can go implement.
If they just buy that and think they're all set,
Right.
then they're 70% not so much.
set.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Joe Chambers, awesome informative show, Paul. Thanks all 4 of you gentlemen. And you just covered Jacqueline's question. Atul, is he coming back? Is he in Florida?
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think he's in Houston.
Okay, he just came back. All right, we have.
He's back.
Right.
There you go. Sorry about that. Do you guys hear me okay?
Oh yeah.
All right. Yeah, you had asked. I don't know how much of that anyone heard, but
None.
focus on, in addition to what Ray and Tom have said around action items, say do a quick assessment from a marketing standpoint where data is coming in. Know all of those channels where PII is coming in, because that means there's a copy elsewhere, and then where is information going out? An simple example is, who do we send our CRM data to provide us marketing services? Getting that list in place is going to be a huge stepping stone. I'd want dealers to just get that list and pause and then reach out to one of us. And then when you have the conversation, it's a lot more open-minded. It's not like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. Just tell me how to fix it. When you see the exposure and you list it all out, that's when you start to really want to solve the problem.
Now, in your DMS, you have the ability to print out everybody that comes and goes, right? Everybody that visits your DMS to either pull or push data, you can have a report on. Because keep in mind, some manager 3 managers ago may have signed up for a program. He left the store or she left the store, and a few other people have also left, and nobody else has taken the initiative to even find out what they're paying for. Receivables are just that. Their company is used to paying them, and they know they're paying 20, 25, 30 companies, and the bills just go out. There's so many times, if you don't audit what your bills are, I've gotten bills from companies that I don't even do business with.
So it's bills and it's access to data. And Paul, to your point, sometimes vendors aren't doing this on purpose, but somewhere the plumbing underneath their business model, there's some leak of data. You just can't trust it. So absolutely, just like you go through your monthly subscriptions on your credit card, which hopefully everyone does. But you sort of want to check that log. And I've seen one of those reports from one of these big DMS systems, and it's amazing. It shows you every company and what module they have access to, inventory, this, PII. That information is gold for this audit purpose. So definitely everyone should ask that question and get that list.
And you know what the interesting thing was? When you asked the dealer to print such a report, there are many that didn't know there was such a report available, but then the look of surprise on the person's face, like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know we were paying for this, and that. Wow. Go ahead.
And just as a follow-on comment to what Atul said, part of the Gramm Leach Bliley regulations is that you have to have a data retention policy, and you have to have it written and it has to be executed. So kind of a colleague of mine said that the FTC is kind of looking at this like too much data is just liability. And if you've got customers who haven't been in the store in 15 years and they haven't serviced their car, they haven't bought a car, why are you keeping that data? Because if you do have a breach, then it's just one more piece of liability that you have. So
and you can't even legally SMS or email people from 10 years ago.
Legally, legally is the operative word in that sense.
We got a couple of comments here. Let's see. So
Hi, Brooke
said they are portraying to the dealer are 100% good to go, but not. And Rachel Swanson says, last thought, legal data without action is just data. Love that. We know what to do. We just have a hard time getting off our butts and doing it. Right? we've known about this since 1999. And we've been reminded in 2003, and I think it was 2015 again, a couple of not so subtle reminders. So the time to act is yesterday, because we all know in the car business, particularly, you blink an eye and it's 5 years later. And here, how many days until December 9th? We count down to how many days till Christmas. But the countdown we really need to be having now is how many days till December 9th. And I appreciate, you guys are saying that as long as you're taking the steps, you're a step in the right direction. And I'm not one for doom and gloom and fear. Oh, Darth Vader. But it's not like getting pulled over and flashing a smile and having the officer say to you, I'm just going to give you a warning, right? They don't have to give you a warning.
It's $46,517 per violation, and that's not defined yet. Whether if you have 10 customers who are breached, you don't know whether that's going to be one violation or 10.
Right. They don't have to give you a break. The writing's been on the wall. It's all over. It's been debated. The extension has been declined, and it's about to be showtime.
And I'll tell you real quick, the thing that I'm scared about is no different than the amount of auditors the IRS has hired. And Nina, what's her name? The FTC head,
Chopra. That's
yeah,
the CFPB. That's the CFPB.
Yeah. So the FTC, the IRS, all of these are newly empowered entities of the government that want to go after things, right? And it's not a revenue generator, but it's really, I think
it is a revenue generator.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's true. IRS hired all those people to find revenue, I guess, even though the word revenue is not in the FTC, let's take it for what it's worth. They're going to use fees as a way to teach and as a way to fund their continued efforts.
In May, just real quick before we wrap, Paul, in May, I went on the FTC jobs board and I counted 24 lawyer positions that were open.
Wow.
They were hiring. So,
wow. Well, listen, Tom, Ray, Atul, I can't thank you gentlemen enough. This has been hopefully eye-opening for many. There's, to quote Joe Chambers, it's so far out of the average dealer's wheelhouse, it's not even funny. And if you guys and gals are like me, you always remember what you forgot to ask when you had the opportunity to do so. The beauty of the internet is if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, this information is still on the internet. I have tagged both all the gentlemen here, Tom, Ray, Atul. If you're not connected with them, I suggest strongly that you get connected with them. And look, two things come out of every conversation. You're either going to say, yeah, you know what? I got this covered. All of the things that were recommended are things we are already and have been proactively doing, and we're on the road. The other part of it might be, wow, what was the name of that report again that could be run? I never heard of it. I don't understand it. And I didn't know the fines were that big. So the initial conversation is always free, right? You click on the name, you reach out, you message, you find the contact info, you make a phone call, and you have a conversation and just get some guidance. We don't know what we don't know, but there's a lot of experts out there that do know what we don't know. And you can't just say, oh, I didn't know, because that doesn't matter anymore. That's not going to cut it. So thank you, everybody that tuned in tonight, for your great questions and contributions. Thank you to those that are going to watch it on the replay. We have a serious number of people that watch it on the replay. I know this because weeks later, I'll get a question or comment 45 minutes into what's now over an hour and a half show. We did the record today. There was so much content. We went way over, but I love it. I appreciate you guys taking the time. I wish you all a safe and successful next week. Few comments. Brooke says she's got to jump. Gary says we have been building helpful solutions to build your new brand. Puts his website on there. Mike Fisher, great meeting, well done. And he says the most valuable commodity I know of is information.
Gordon Gecko.
Gordon Gecko. So you guys stay on for a moment after we tune off. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week on Sunday Night Live.
Thanks, Paul.